Now, another nutrient that you may have heard a lot of controversy about is fats. A lot of people think that fats are better than sugars, and there's a little studies indicating that that may be the case, but primarily the reason why people advocate for fats over sugars is that fats tend to give you a feeling of fullness a lot faster, and so you're a lot less likely to eat a lot of fat as opposed to eating a lot of sugar. The important thing to remember is that for a healthy lifestyle, it's not cutting out a certain food group, but rather what you want to do is reduce the amount of calories. But in addition to the fat versus sugar equation, another thing that a lot of people talk about are saturated, unsaturated, and trans fats. Here we have a really nice image of what saturated, unsaturated, and trans fats look like at the molecular level. Saturated fats, we talked about these in the first lecture, are fats comprised of single covalent bonds, so they're a lot easier for your body to break apart. They are straight, however, and so because they're straight molecules, they tend to stack up really easily in your blood vessels, blocking blood flow, and so can increase your risk of heart attack or stroke. Saturated fats, if you remember, these are the types of fats that are found in dairy, red meat, some other types of meat like pork in the case of bacon, and also butter, right? So cheeses and things like that. Unsaturated fats, on the other hand, these have at least one double bond, and every time you have a double bond, there's going to be a bend or a kink in the chain, making these types of fats sort of bent or kinked. And as a result, they don't build up easily in your blood vessels and can increase the fluidity and flow of the blood in your bloodstream and actually be pretty healthy. The best ones of these are the monounsaturated fats because they only have a single covalent or double covalent bond, making them a little bit easier to break apart than the polyunsaturated fats, which would have more than one double bond. Every time you have a double bond, that makes that bond even stronger and harder for your body to break apart. So these monounsaturated fats are the healthiest of the types of fats. And in fact, in some studies I've read indicate that it's almost impossible to eat too much of these. Although again, you want to minimize your calories, but really eating a lot of olive oil, peanuts and nut oils, fish oils, things like that. Avocado, really healthy. Remember that coconut oil is more along with the saturated fat because it's solid at room temperature. And because it's solid at room temperature, you can tell that it's a saturated fat, not an oil like an unsaturated fat. And so it fits more in this category of still, okay to consume just in limited supply or quantity. Finally, we have the man-made fats, the trans fats. Trans fats, as you can see here, do have this double bond, but the double bond is oriented in such a way that the molecule itself is mostly straight. And as a result, these can stack up really easily in your bloodstream. They're also, because they are a totally new type of molecule not seen before by living systems on Earth, are triggered as being foreign or something that the body should try to get rid of. And so it ends up accumulating a lot of these inflammatory molecules that we talked about earlier, leading to an increased risk of heart attack or stroke. And in addition, because they're totally foreign and totally new, your body can't break them down. So unlike saturated and unsaturated fats that your body can break down, your body cannot break down the trans fats. Trans fat food is things in processed foods and also fried foods, also margarine and Crisco. So all of these are sources of trans fat. And you can also see the amount of trans fat on some of these processed foods that you may buy from the grocery store as well. What that means is that some of these fried foods, some of these processed foods, anything with margarine or Crisco in it, if you were to eat that, your body can't break it down. And so it's going to be in your body until your body can release it naturally in your poop, which takes a very long time. I always sort of like to think of this as like if you eat a bunch of like fried chicken or something with a lot of Crisco or margarine on it, and then you go for a run, that run would have broken down some sugars in your body and maybe some saturated and unsaturated fat, but the amount of trans fats you consumed is still there, 100% of it, because your body can't break it down. And this is one of the reasons why the FDA is currently investigating possibly making trans fats totally illegal, But for right now, you're still able to find them in lots of different food items, especially in the processed food aisle. So we're going to move there to some foods that you may have heard have purported benefits. The first one I'm going to start off with is wine. There's a lot of advocacy for drinking wine. Even our U.S. government's FDA advocates for drinking 1 glass of wine every day with your dinner, which is pretty incredible, that they think there's that much evidence to indicate that it is good for you. This is based largely on what's known as the French paradox, where the British, who were looking at the French and other countries, noticed that the French were able to survive and live very long, healthy lives with small to little cardiovascular, heart disease, heart attacks, and strokes. And this was a paradox for them because they noticed that a lot of the French eat a lot of really high-fat foods, like a lot of butter, a lot of cheeses, but still they had a longer lifespan, less obesity, and less cardiovascular disease than the British and Americans. And so then they were thinking, well, why is that the case? And they narrowed it down to possibly the fact that the French consume a lot of red wine and wine in general. Red wine, it turns out, is one of these foods that contains that molecule resveratrol that may help act as a modulator of the SIRT2 gene, which affects the ability for your DNA to be used and maybe puts your DNA into a somewhat dormant state, protecting your cells from aging and cancer risk. The important thing to keep in mind, though, is that there were lots of studies done on this, but none of them were extraordinarily conclusive. One of the important things to remember is that people that do drink a lot of red wine versus people that drank beer or other sources of alcohol, those that drink wine with dinner are probably richer and can afford a higher salary with better health care, maybe exercise more regularly, things like that. So not to discount the socioeconomic implications in drinking red wine as well. But despite all that, the FDA is still recommending drinking 1 glass of red wine per day with dinner. The important thing is that this needs to be in moderation because the alcohol in red wine is can be toxic in any higher concentrations in the body. And so to make sure that you don't consume too much alcohol. Another food item that is considered to be possibly healthy, you may have heard of this, is chocolate. I've heard some people say, oh, dark chocolate, that's good for you, right? Maybe not white chocolate or milk chocolate, but dark chocolate is good for you. It turns out that if you really look into it, chocolate companies spend millions of dollars on research and propaganda to make it sound like chocolate is good for you and that it's not just a treat every once in a while. This was based on some studies indicating that chocolate contains molecules called flavonoids. Flavonoids are molecules that naturally exist in chocolate and some other food items that protect the plant from pathogens, like fungi and other sort of diseases. In the human body, though, flavonoids act as antioxidants. Antioxidants may sound healthy to you, and that's because they are. Antioxidants are things found in lots of really deep colored berries, pomegranate, boysenberries, blackberries, things like that. You also find them in coffee and red wine, but in chocolate they're found as flavonoids. The reason why antioxidants are considered healthy is because they work against oxidation of your molecules in your cell. As organisms that breathe and require oxygen for life, we take in a lot of oxygen into our cells, and that oxygen can result in some uncontrolled chemical reactions, sort of destroying our cells slowly over time. It's known that oxygen can eventually lead to wrinkles and gray hair, things like that, that are associated with aging, and also cancer. And if you take in antioxidants in your food, that can reduce those toxic oxygen molecules and help reduce your risk of cancers and gray hair and aging in general and things like that. However, the levels of antioxidants, of flavonoids in chocolate is pretty low. There's in fact much more antioxidants in berries, as I mentioned, and coffee and other things. So in fact, it's actually better to still not consume chocolate. In addition, milk chocolate is high in sugar and fat, and that can eliminate completely all of the benefits of consuming any tiny amounts of flavonoids you can get from chocolate. Another thing that you might have heard about chocolate is that you shouldn't feed chocolate to dogs, and that's based on a molecule called theobromine. Theobromine is a mild diuretic. It helps you pee a little bit. It's something that's also found in some other foods like coffee. It also acts as a mild stimulant. It's not quite like caffeine, but it does help stimulate your body a little bit, your respiratory tract and your heart rate. In higher quantities, it can lower high blood pressure, and that has led to the rumor that dark chocolate helps the heart, but of course it does not, because the amount of theobromine in chocolate is so small and your body eliminates it fairly quickly. However, the reason why chocolate is poisonous to dogs is because while we have the ability to break down theobromine, dogs do not have those enzymes. They cannot break down theobromine, so when they consume chocolate, the theobromine remains in their body for extended periods of time. This can result in an interruption of the urinary tract and